is what led to you coming to campus here?
I got a phone call from my friend Jill Connor Brown, who's an incredible writer, sort of a female Mark Twain to me, and just my greatest friend. And Jill told me about this campus and that I really had to meet Anthony Thaxton. She sent me a sample of some film that they had shot, some shows they had done, and they were just spectacular. And I was going on and on about how great they were, and she said, well, they're local, they're right here, you ought to talk with them and maybe y'all could do something together. And when I got the invitation, I just jumped at the chance.
And can you tell us about how you've enjoyed this campus so far, being around here?
Well, I grew up in Memphis, and Memphis is probably more of a Mississippi town than it is even a Tennessee town. So this is like coming home for me. I come back to Jackson every year for the Sweet Potato Queens event, and they support the Children's Hospital, and I really believe in that and that ministry. And the school is amazing for me. I grew up a Baptist myself, still am, and it's not like I'm paying back. It's more like I'm getting inspired by being in touch with young people who really want to live their lives for a purpose much greater than themselves, and that inspires me and it fills up my soul.
What are some of the things you'll be talking about tonight in tonight's talk?
I want to talk about creativity with them, and also keeping that light burning inside themselves. That, as the Bible says, you can gain the whole world and lose your own soul. And it also says that wide is the road that leads to destruction, and narrow is the path that leads to life. And I want to talk about that narrow path and how that path leads to life.
And the last question is, you have made so many great, you've directed some, you've written some great films that a lot of people have seen. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are some of the favorite movies that you've done, maybe a favorite, and what are you working on in the future?
All of my films feel like my creative children, and I couldn't begin to pick one over another. We love them all in different ways and for different reasons. But each one has to be something for me that I love enough to sacrifice for, and to give everything I have for, to pray for, to bleed for if necessary. And the latest things that I'm working on, probably the most impactful, is I'm working with Mel Gibson on the Resurrection of the Christ, the sequel to The Passion of the Christ. That is the Mount Everest of all movies. It's a subject that ever since I grew up in a Baptist church in Memphis, and then one that my grandmother founded outside of Lexington, Tennessee. Ever since I was a boy, the resurrection has been the deepest mystery and the most meaningful part of the faith to me. And this is a chance for us to explore that, to see where it's going to go. It's mysterious and incredibly exciting. On the other side of the ledger, I decided to do a live show. I wanted to bring people together in a physical, real way, not just COVID has separated us, and the world just preaches fear to us at every turn of the road. And I wanted to do a live event in which we confront fear with faith.
Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Well, this is a real honor and a privilege for me. I read your bio, know your work, but I want to unpack just a couple of things that maybe I don't see in print somewhere.
Sure.
But just help me to understand what got you started on the journey that's brought you to where you are. Growing up in Memphis, Baptist church, all that. But at what point was there like, this is what I feel like my calling is to do music, to do movies? What was the aha moment, I guess, is what I want to ask.
Boy, that's a great question. When I was about 16 or 17, I really discovered music as a way to grow closer to God. Mm-hmm. It was an expression for me creativity and of love and joy. And I talked with the pastor of my home church. When I majored in religion in college, I went to divinity school.
Yeah.
And I was sitting down with my pastor, and he said, "Do you feel the call to be a pastor?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't.
Okay.
But I know it's the greatest call anyone could ever have." And he said, "You're wrong. The greatest call anyone can ever have is the one God has for you." And
That's really good.
it was one of the greatest things anyone ever told me. Of course, as Baptists, we believe in the priesthood of all believers. And I always told my friends that I never felt that I needed to be ordained to have a greater obligation, that my obligations were total. Being ordained or not ordained, I was a believer, I was a follower. And I had to follow my calling. When I was in seminary, I told my friends I felt guilty about leaving them to go and pursue a career first in songwriting.
Sure.
And they said, "Look, if we could do what you do, we would do it. If we were called to do what you do, we would do it. We're going to do what we're called to do. You're going to do what you're called to do, and we're going to pray for you."
Okay.
The man who told me that, I named my first son after him.
Okay.
And I've always felt that God's plan was better than mine.
Sure.
So I first went out to pursue music. That led me into movies. I had never imagined that I would be in movies. I began to write them, then began to direct them, and now I've come full circle back into writing and performing music. So I don't think I'll leave the movie business altogether, but it was not my first love.
Sure.
And I'm now with my first love.
Okay, good. Well, just looking at the movies that you've had a hand in, I guess Braveheart certainly was the one that kind of put you in the forefront of everything. Because weren't you, as I recall, wasn't that an Academy Award nominated screenplay?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, in your wildest dreams, I mean, did you see any of that coming? I mean, tell me about how you first made that contact with Mel Gibson. Or let me back up a little bit. You wrote the screenplay first, correct?
Yes.
And then he found it. Was that the progression?
I sent it to him.
Okay.
I wrote the screenplay without any given actor in mind.
Okay.
I wanted to tell that story.
Yeah.
And then the studio that I was involved with said, "Who do you think should play William Wallace?" And the strange thing was there was only one actor in the whole world that I could imagine playing him, and that was Mel. Mel, we sent him the screenplay. He eventually read it, and I had a meeting with him, and I could tell he was interested, but he had not said yes yet. And took a trip to Scotland and found battle reenactors and sets, and came back and had a meeting with him. And it was at that meeting when he said, "I would like to direct this myself," and that had never been brought up. He said, "How would you feel about that?" And I said, "I would support that, absolutely."
Okay.
And our friendship was sort of born in that moment.
Okay. Next up, I guess, was We Were Soldiers. Was that the next one, or I missed one? And there's Man in the Iron Mask was the one. Was that your first directing job?
That was my first directing, yes.
Okay.
And that was quite a first movie to direct, with John Malkovich and Leonardo DiCaprio and all the others.
Bunch of nobodies, right?
Yeah, a bunch of nobodies. And one of the things that we find, and it's one of the things that I'm talking about in this new show that I'm doing, is that we tell ourselves before we take a step, we need to know exactly where we're going to go and exactly how we plan to get there. But living is stepping forward in faith.
Sure.
And there are consequences you never could have imagined. And you have to step forward into the unknown. And that's certainly what I did in directing that movie.
Well, that kind of raises another question. If that was your first directorial responsibility, what was an inspiration, or where did you, how did you come up with your style to direct? What was the background there? Was there another director that you thought, "I like what they do, can I emulate that in any fashion," or was this just all Randall?
I was certainly standing in the shadow of all the other directors who had made movies that I had loved.
Okay.
And my goal was I wanted to make the kind of movie that I had seen when I was in my late teens, when I would walk out of a movie theater and say to myself, my life will never be the same because of what I just saw.
Huge.
And I wanted my movies to be that kind of movie.
Mm-hmm.
That was always what I was aiming at, and that was what I always promised the cast and the crew, is that that's what we're aiming at.
Okay.
Movies like Man for All Seasons, or Spartacus, or even say Sound of Music. I loved Sound of Music.
My wife's favorite movie.
It elevated my spirit, and that was the kind of movie I always aspired to make.
Okay, good. Okay, we were soldiers. Just kind of a little personal thing for context. When I saw it, my wife and I went to see it, and that was one of those times when I was actually a little too young for Vietnam, not by much. I had a draft number, but I didn't. But I was really away. I had plenty of friends, older friends that were over there. Saw it in the theater, and I had to have one of those. I need to walk around the parking lot just a minute. I got out there. Mansion of the Lord just took me out. I mean, it was that, and I've got another question about that too. But I thought this is the first time I think that this particular war has ever been done justly, because it was apolitical.
Yes.
Talk about a little bit about just how, this was an adapted screenplay from the book. What was your intent? What did you want audiences to leave with after they saw that movie? Not just how they felt necessarily, but what was in their minds and hearts after that?
I wanted to get totally past the politics that had so torn at everyone about it, and focus instead on the families.
Yeah.
The men who went, the wives, brothers, sisters, parents, children that they left behind, and some of them came back to, and some of them couldn't come back to. I wanted to make it about them. There was a statement in the prologue of the book that was, Hollywood has gotten the story of the Vietnam veteran wrong every time, putting the knives of twisted politics on the bones of our dead brothers. And when I read that, I knew I was in.
Okay. Well, I would say, again, just personally, that's been my favorite of yours, or the one that just touched me the most. Went on to Secretariat. How is it to direct somebody else's screenplay? Is there a challenge in that?
Well, I did some rewriting on that screenplay. But it was a terrific screenplay before I ever got to it, and it is different because, and in a certain way, it's the same because you have to internalize everything. You've got to make it your own in a sense. Meaning you've got to own it, you've got to love it. I heard a story about Blake Edwards, who's the man who wrote, directed, and edited the Pink Panther movies. Now, they were comedies, of course, but some of the people that I worked with had worked with him. So you hear stories about how the masters worked themselves, and you take what you can from that. They said that Blake Edwards, when he was directing, he would say, what was this idiot writer thinking when he wrote this? And he was the writer. And then when he was editing, he would say that same thing about the director. You in a certain way have to detach yourself and say, here's what we're trying to do, how are we going to do it? And in a certain way it's really different, but it's also the same experience every time. If you're directing, you're in that given moment. Okay.
Well, the flip side of that would be when you write a screenplay and somebody else directs it, like Pearl Harbor, for instance. Is there an inherent challenge in that, watching somebody else take your words and maybe go in a direction or give it a vibe that you didn't necessarily want?
Yes, absolutely there is, and it cuts in both directions. They can elevate it and make it far better than you had even imagined. They make it different, and you find yourself that you love it, and they can make it different, and you feel that it was a tragedy that they missed what could have been there. That happens in both ways. The metaphor I use is when my sister got married, my father and I were standing in the back of the church, and my father looked down. They were taking pictures at that time after the wedding. They're getting the pictures, and my dad and I were standing in the back of the church, and he said, well, she's got another shoulder to cry on now. and it feels like that. That you've taken a beloved child and you've given it to someone else to raise or to care for. But at the best relationships of that, like when I've worked with, say, Mel Gibson on Braveheart, he's got to do what he sees, but he was really respectful about, or open to turn to me and say, what would you do here, or how should we, even how should this be edited, or how do you see it?
Okay.
That you become a partner.
Okay.
And that's a great thing.
Okay, good. That's very helpful. You know, I look at some of the actors you've worked with. You know, you've got like Sam Elliott, who to me is like a national treasure. Okay?
Oh, he is.
Yeah, he's something else. But Greg Kinnear, who I felt like was sort of the under the radar guy in Winter Soldiers. There's one scene in particular where he is just full on intense. You know, I can't really remember I meant to go back and look at it, but he says, "I'll kill you." You know.
Yeah.
That's not fair to ask you who you really like to work with, but when you're dealing with an actor, how much latitude do you give them as far as interpreting their character?
That's really a terrific question. You choose the people that you feel are in their essence the characters you want them to play, and then it's almost easy. It becomes, I don't start by telling them how I want them to perform the scene. The screenplay tells them how I want them to perform the scene, but I start with seeing what their instincts are, and I've chosen people that I believe have the right instincts. The funny thing is, I've had opportunities to work with other actors that I simply could not believe were real in that role. So I just I can't do it if I don't believe them.
Yeah.
But the great ones, the right ones, make you stand there and watch what happens, and you feel it's a divine thing. It's a sort of miracle. Margot Martindale is one of the actors I've worked with more than once, and we sort of have a pact that I can't do a movie without calling her. But all of those, did you mean John Malkovich, Sam Elliott, Mel Gibson? There are those actors that I would just jump at the chance to work with at any time, anywhere.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. I think I saw my question just off the Love and Honor. Is there a movie version out there ever?
We are working on that all the time. Currently, Henry Cavill is really interested in playing it, and I love Henry Cavill. And you talk about somebody in their essence. Henry has a brother who is a general in the sort of commandos of the British Army. Henry's the real deal.
Cool.
I'm hoping that with Henry we can make that happen.
Okay, great. Thank you.